This is where I went to school. That's where the school was, right here. And there was a statue here, and this is where we prayed. Well, I couldn't run because the wind was out of me.
That's my father and son. It's a scene that plays out for Canadian families everywhere. A grandfather laughing while sharing some old memories. In Ojibwe, we have a word, dan kobitagan, that explains how the generations in a family are linked together like a thread. But in my family, those ties were nearly severed. It's a story of physical and sexual abuse, alcoholism, suicide, infidelity, and finally, redemption. This is my family story, and it starts right here at St. Mary's Residential School. St. Mary's Indian Residential School opened in Kenora, Ontario in 1894. It was run by the Oblates until 1962 when it closed. My father Tubasonaquit was brought here by his parents when he was 7, and in an attempt to get rid of his Anishinaabe language and heritage, the priest who registered him renamed him.
And that's how I got that name, Peter Kelly.
Yeah.
And this is how I was registered. Then after that, I was given this number 54, which stayed with me all the years that I spent in residential school.
By now, we've all heard the stories from residential schools. My father didn't escape the horrors. When he was 9 years old, one of his teachers, a nun, called him to her bedroom.
You know, she jumped on top of me, she began humping me, and she said, "That's all your people are good for, is just fucking." That's what she said, you know. And for about a couple of weeks, I didn't know whether I had been raped. I didn't know whether I had been beat up, you know. I didn't know what had happened.
He was depressed for weeks and was afraid to return to her classroom for the rest of the year, but he had no choice.
But I could not understand the givers of the teachings of God, how they behaved.
He left St. Mary's at the age of 15, and like many survivors, he turned to alcohol to escape his confusion and pain. This is the famous couches at the reserve. They're still, I think we just threw them out last year. Diane Kelly is the Grand Chief of Treaty 3 in northwestern Ontario. She's also my older sister from my dad's previous marriage. I grew up with her, but she was more like an aunt because her kids were the same age as me. When she was a child, though, she saw our dad at his worst. He was a violent alcoholic.
The pain is still there. Even talking about it today, it's very disturbing. You know, I love my father deeply, but there's a piece of my life that was profoundly impacted by some of the events in my childhood. And I also don't have my brothers here.
So this is you, Danny and Daryl. Danny passed away in a car accident. A few years earlier, he took his own life.
Yeah, 4 years earlier, 4 years apart. The trauma that they experienced and the lack of coping skills might have led to their ultimate short lives.
Losing someone that you held in your arms when they were a little baby, when they were 2 years old, 5 years old when you held them, and they're gone. And it's unbelievable. The pain is just totally unbelievable. And this is where the opening is.
Being taken from his home at a young age meant he was raised by people who didn't love him, and so he never learned what it meant to be a parent.
It's my dad's cross.
Is it?
Yeah. Right there, that's where my dad's buried.
So were you, when they buried him, were you actually out here, standing around the grave?
I was over there.
My grandfather died after being hit by a car in 1947 and was buried in a cemetery at St. Mary's. My dad was allowed to attend the funeral, but an hour later he was called back to an assembly and beaten by a nun in front of his peers. His transgression? Standing beside his father's coffin, as is the Ojibwe custom, rather than kneeling like a good Catholic.
When she started beating me up, I resolved that I'm not going to cry. If that's your best shot, you know, you don't know what I'm going through here and seeing my father being buried.
Yeah.
And this physical pain that I'm feeling, that's nothing compared to what I feel.
It's okay, Detta.
Yeah.
Rediscovering his emotions has been a long journey for my father.
It's a very tough one.
Yeah. A journey that took him to the highest seat of the religion that was at the center of his darkest moments. He was part of a delegation that heard the Pope express his sorrow over residential schools. It was that meeting and a return to his traditional beliefs that led to his salvation. These are Sundance scars. They come from a ceremony that my dad has been doing for years and he actually introduced me to. It's considered the ultimate offering in our culture. You give of your own secret that they don't allow any pictures to be taken. What it is a summertime ceremony where you fast and dance for 4 days. At the end of those 4 days, they cut your flesh and tie those piercings to a procession of a dozen buffalo skulls. Then you pull those skulls around the outside of a circle hundreds of feet wide. The ceremony helped them deal with the loss of my brothers.
The pain that my son would have gone through as he was dying. And all my loved ones when they died, that pain that they've gone through. I went through that pain when I was pulling buffalo skulls.
Right in the middle of this heavy conversation, we're joined by a visitor.
And how come we came?
Yeah, this is what Anishinaabe say when they're going through a lot of pain. The Creator puts something in front of you to make you forget your pain.
Put your hand out, see if you can touch him. There he goes.
Hey.
As our day of discovery wraps up at St. Mary's,
See, all these guys went to school here.
my dad shows his grandson some pictures of his childhood.
Migize.
Migize, the Anishinaabe word for bald eagle. The second good omen soars overhead of where St. Mary's used to stand.
And there were little guys there just like you.
My son is 5 years old now. He's the age kids were when they were taken away from their families. When I look at him and I see how frail he is, I wonder if he could take a beating from an adult like my dad did. I hear him cry for his mom sometimes, and I wonder if he could survive for 10 months without his parents. Seeing my son at this age makes my father's residential school experience hit home. I understand why he screwed up so much later in life, and I forgive him. Now it's up to me to make things a little bit better for my son.
So we're doing this. And we see that picture, the grotto.
Can I have that?
Yeah. More pictures. This guy's going nuts.